Okay, I know it's like a minute till, but I'm going to go ahead and start. This is the Affirmation of Faith panel. Starts from, well, it's really about 12:55 or 1 to 1:55. So I'd like to introduce our participants. Reverend Brian Chenowith, minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Lexington. His spiritual upbringing was Catholic and Anglican, yet came to the Unitarian Universalism early on. Seminary graduate from Meadville, Lombard, in Chicago. Reverend Chenowith is currently a doctoral student at Boston University School of Theology. Reverend Chenowith served on the ministerial, I've got to slow down, sorry, Formation Network Mid-America Nominating Committee, and in several capacities with the Heartland UU Ministers Association. Reverend Chenowith is passionate about ritual theology and distilling liberal religious tradition into relevant practices in daily lives. He is a member of the Religious Naturalist Association and focuses on work and ministry in that worldview. Next, we have J.R. Zerkowski, founder of Lexington's first LGBTQ plus Catholic ministry, chair of LGBTQ plus Outreach Commission, and director of LGBTQ plus ministry for Lexington Roman Catholic Diocese. He's also a national speaker for LGBTQ plus ministry in the Catholic Church. He's the founder of Lexington's United Interfaith Encounters and Lexington United Interfaith Dialogues. He designed and facilitated Lexington's first Pride Interfaith service. He was instrumental in the beginning of 2 LGBTQ plus support groups at Lexington Catholic High School and other Catholic LGBTQ ministries are these sites throughout the United States. Mr. Zerkowski has received multiple mayoral proclamations and awards for his interfaith and LGBTQ plus work. Examples include the George H.W. Bush Points of Light Award and the Interfaith Community Temple Adath Israel Jethro Award for his work building bridges within the Lexington community. In 2021, he was appointed to the Mayor's Human Rights Campaign Municipal Equality Index Work Group for the City of Lexington, Kentucky, and the Mayor's Human Rights Campaign Municipal Equality Index Law Enforcement Subgroup. And last but not least, he's currently the Executive Director of Fortunate Families, a national Catholic network of parents of LGBTQ plus sons and daughters. Welcome, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Williams. I'm your moderator for this session. My personal pronouns are she, her, and hers. Our session is being recorded, and speaker transcription and participant transcription is on. So we'll be saving that and recording this for later. Please type any comments or questions into chat, and I'll make sure I bring those up with our speakers. And with that, I will turn it over to our distinguished speakers. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think it was turned over to us, JR.
It has been. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. Is there a question you'd like us to prompt us with, or just go with the questions that you shared with us prior to this, or just introduce ourselves further?
We can do this pretty much anyway. Why don't you just kind of give us just a couple of minutes about why you would want to be here and kind of what maybe led you in this direction, and then I'll open comments from our participant or people here with us today. And if no one has questions, I'll bring up the other ones.
Okay. All right. Rock, paper, scissors, JR?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So it's a delight to be here. This is the second time participating here, so it's just wonderful to be with BCTC again. It's wonderful that this community provides such resources for people who want to engage the LGBTQ plus community and for the LGBT plus community to be seen and heard and to know that they're not alone, especially in a world that sometimes makes us feel alone. And so it's great to be here. So I've been a Unitarian Universalist parish minister for close to 10 years now, and 7 years here in Kentucky, and from Chicago, lived in Boston, so it's great to be here. You know, it's a broad question of what led me down this path, and we don't have time to get into all of the specifics. However, I've always been called to ministry, and also I've known very early on that I was a gay male, and that was something that I would have to navigate. That there might be traditions that wouldn't want to affirm me, that there would be groups and people that wouldn't want to affirm me. At the time, the marriage was not yet legal, so that was something to also consider and think about, and something that weighed heavily on me, just discerning my path in life. But in Unitarian Universalist tradition, I found a home that was there, and that was there to support me no matter what. And the one thing that stands out to me from my religious background that still to this day, I think was one of the greatest motivators of wanting to serve this tradition, but also continue to advocate for justice across the spectrum, is that I remember, and it's such a simple thing, is one Sunday, I was really young teenager, maybe I was 13, or maybe I was still preteen, 12. I remember the congregation that we were part of, the Unitarian Church up in Hinsdale, Illinois, became a welcoming congregation. And so this was the late 90s, and everybody was so exuberant about becoming a welcoming congregation to LGBTQ persons. And I remember distinctly the moment of passing out these rainbow ribbons in the service, and how everyone was clamoring for a ribbon and proudly wearing it, and they kept wearing it. And I still have that ribbon, and that ribbon is like prized possession. Like if this house was burning down, I would go and grab that ribbon and a few other things, because it was this moment of being seen and affirmed in that tradition, and knowing that I was not alone, that the youth group was there for me, that the minister was there for me, that the people in that room were there for me, that they are willing to show up and to be present for the needs of LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ adults in that congregation. And so that was a great motivator in wanting to go to seminary and wanting to continue to serve this tradition, but also to engage other traditions across interfaith lines, for UUs to engage Christians, because we're not a Christian-specific tradition, to engage Christians, to engage Muslims, to engage our Jewish siblings, to engage people all across faith traditions, and to also be present to them, to listen, but also to fiercely advocate for LGBTQ affirmation. And so that's something that I'm very committed to. The congregation I serve and the congregations I've served have always had a significant LGBTQ population. But I say that with an asterisk. Every congregation has LGBTQ people, I guarantee it. And to continue to be an advocate. So it's a wonderful thing. My tradition has been affirming LGBTQ ministers, and you know, you add in all the letters, but truly since about the 60s and 70s, though it wasn't easy, I want to be clear in that it was not easy. And more our ministry is significantly LGBTQ. We have a growing number of non-binary ministers in the ministry, as well as transgendered ministers and people from all walks of life. And when you flesh out the plus in LGBTQ, it just goes on and on and on. And so it's great to see increasing representation there, and also to navigate this wide world of affirming a variety of sexualities, to affirming people no matter what their gender identity is, wherever they are on their life's path, and to certainly continue that good work. And so because our congregations are, many of them are affirming, it doesn't mean we're done in that affirming work. And so we're now expected to continue to affirm LGBTQ persons, to keep navigating these things. Our youth and young adults go through sexuality education in our religious exploration, which is our Sunday school program. And they regularly learn about sexuality from preschool all the way through seniors. We have sexuality education in our churches. And so in preschool and kindergarten, we start learning about what is your body, and also how to talk about if something inappropriate is happening. And then later on, when you finally get to middle school and high school, they start learning the things that they're not learning in school, and also how to navigate questions of gender identity and sexuality. And those questions don't stop there. It continues in our education of adults all the way through seniors as well. So it's great to know that that is something that we offer in partnership with the United Church of Christ. We developed that curriculum. It's called Our Whole Lives. And so that's something that's really important to us as a tradition. If you look back to the early 90s, there was controversy about this, churches offering this, and yet we still fiercely advocated for that and continue to do so this day. There's many other things I could tell you, but I don't want to take all of the time about our tradition and what we continue to offer. But I'll turn it over to JR.
Thank you, and thank you for that wonderful witness to living as God would have us live. Sadly, the Roman Catholic tradition, of which I'm a part, has not had a wonderful record nor a wonderful relationship with the LGBTQ plus community. That was made very clear to me many years ago when I was working in South Florida, and we took a gamble, a big chance, and reached out to those suffering with HIV and AIDS. This would have been in the 80s. We were looked at as renegades. We were shunned. Catholic churches just weren't reaching out. The pastor with whom I worked at that point was a very prophetic man, and he taught me an awful lot about taking chances and about doing the right thing, even when the church leadership has chosen not to do the right thing, not to do the good thing, not even to do the thing that the gospel compels us to do, which is to love unconditionally and to love in concrete ways. I later went to work in the Diocese of Orlando, Florida, and I got to know a lot of people in that diocese, worked there for nearly 15 years, and then came to Lexington. After 6 years or 7 years in Lexington, I read about the horrors of the Pulse Massacre. And one Sunday morning, before I went to do my ministry at St. Paul's, downtown Lexington, when I got to Sunday Mass, not a word was said about those killed. Not a prayer was offered, not a candle lit, nothing. Had those been heterosexual people, we would have been clamoring over ourselves to memorialize them and denounce the atrocity that took place at Pulse. But because they were members largely of the LGBTQ community, we did nothing, and that was a defining moment in my life. I could not be a part of a church that kept silent. So either I was walking or we were going to have to change somehow. And change we did. It was painful, it was excruciating, many tears, but we had to come to terms, and I had to really hold my ground about reaching out, embracing with unconditional love, inviting in, celebrating the dignity of, and allowing people to be just as they are as members of our parish community, and hopefully our diocesan community, and even larger still, members of the Roman Catholic Church Universal. Now, we've got a long way to go, but we're wrestling at this point. We're wrestling. I don't understand why there has to be a wrestling match, really, to be honest with you, because it seems perfectly clear to me what we should be doing. We should be accepting people as they are, as beloved children of God, as siblings in the community of faith and beyond, and certainly not treating people with less than respect, compassion, and sensitivity that our Catholic Catechism calls us to treat specifically homosexual people with, which means LGBT people, LGBTQ people. Respect, compassion, and sensitivity. That's what our catechism tells us that we must do. And it goes further and tells us that every sign of unjust discrimination in that regard has to be avoided. What part of this do we not get? So I never planned on this career path that I would be both beginning an LGBTQ ministry here in Lexington at the parish, or going around the country and speaking and helping parishes and dioceses and archdioceses and campus ministries and colleges and universities and high schools and grade schools and local communities of faith discern, vision, and begin intentional outreach to the LGBTQ community. However, God had different plans, and my only prayer was, you open the doors and I'll walk through them, and I'm still walking through them. And what we're witnessing is, right now, the evolution of doctrine within the Catholic Church. And they say that the Catholic Church thinks in centuries. Well, we don't have centuries to think about this. Our young lives are being taken at an alarming rate because of words like intrinsically disordered that we find in our catechism that needs to be changed. It needs to be changed quickly and should not be in there. We know too much. Follow the science, they say. Church needs to obviously listen to the medical community, the psychological community, follow the science in this regard. We've learned a lot. And of course, the catechism can be changed. One of our popes, Pope John Paul II, of course, changed the catechism. It's not written in stone, and our understanding as we progress has to influence what we are saying about people. So if we're people of life, and if we are people that really believe in the gospel, and we are people who really value the image of God in one another, we've got to have these hard conversations. And I happen to be the guy that starts them all over the country and beyond in this Catholic Church. One of the guys. There are people far better than I doing this. I just happen to be thrown into this mix. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I'm hopeful. There are days when I just want to walk. But, if not you, then who comes into my mind? One of my favorite people, one of my heroes in life is a guy by the name of Francis of Assisi. And he said, while we have time, let us do good, he told his friars. And he told his friars, and when you've done something good, don't sit on your laurels. Say, up to now, we've done nothing, let's start again. So if I'm tempted to think that I've done something here in Lexington or somewhere, that's enough. It's never enough. And I'm going to do something really shameless now. And I won't tell you anymore. I will not go on about my life and my story and how I was thrust into this ministry and so forth and so on, because on the 22nd of February, my book was released. Coming Out and Coming Home, a gay man's journey from marginalization to ministry, with a few miracles along the way. And the unique thing about this book, in my opinion, is not what I have to say. It's who wrote the foreword. And it was written by the Bishop of Lexington, Bishop John Stowe, writing the foreword for a book about a gay employee in the Catholic Church. Did you ever think that day was going to come, an out gay employee? That day has come. So we are progressing. We are moving forward. And some gay employees are safe within the Catholic Church and others are not. And my work will not stop until every youth, every person, every LGBTQ person, whether they're employed by the church or members of the church or looking at the church or just in the community, are not hurt by the church and are welcomed by the Catholic Church in the totality of who they are. Aren't you glad you asked? That's why I'm here.
Thank you. That is wonderful. At this time, I'm going to open for any questions anyone may have. You're welcome to either put them in the chat or unmute your mic and ask a question. I'll pause and see if anyone wants to jump in. Okay, I'm not hearing any right now. Hopefully our continued conversation will prompt some, but we'll start with some questions that we prepared previously. So the first question would be, how do I respond when politicians condemn my sexuality, citing their religious beliefs?
Well, you can respond with love and righteous indignation at the same time, but I would say respond fiercely as well. We are in a point, and I don't need to point to things happening in the world because we know what's happening, where democracies are threatened. And recently in the history of this country, there's been some advocating that we aren't really a democracy. And so let's begin with that. We are a democracy. Our elected leaders work for the people, and LGBTQ persons and their allies are of the people. And we have to continue to hold our political leaders accountable, to call them out for their actions, to say that, yes, you can believe what you need to believe. However, you represent the people. And here's what the people are saying to you. Now, we know that here in Kentucky, there are several politicians where I know I've been to their offices several times. I've been with people that have been to their offices. People continue to go to their offices and they ignore what the people are saying. But that doesn't mean you need to give up. That doesn't mean you need to keep, think despair is an option here. You need to continue to ally yourself with organizations and people that are continue to advocate for LGBTQ persons and the rights, to advocate for the marginalized all across the spectrum. There are people marginalized in every sector of society. For the poor, for the Black Lives Matter movement, for immigrants, for women. There's still, again, the pay gap, also the threats to women's reproductive health, to continue to advocate for those who are marginalized, to show up for people who are marginalized if you're an ally, to listen to your friends, to listen to your loved ones, and to know that you have a part in this. Now, there may be a long time until politicians start to listen. However, you can be a part of a voting rights initiative and campaign, because that is something we have to be a part of that's going to affect everybody, not just me as a gay man or someone else as someone who's bisexual or transgender or non-binary. That these are critical issues for our time that we need to show up, and now is the time. And so from my tradition, we look to our history of advocating for the marginalized, our own history of being a marginalized religious tradition, of when we were still identifying as Protestant Christians. Many Protestant Christians saw us as outliers, as heretics, and we proudly claim that label. And today, as a non-Christian tradition, we continue to proudly claim that and show up for those who are on the margins. And so that is the invitation for all of you. If you have a faith, then look to your belief in a good and loving God that calls you, again, the verse from Micah is repeated so often. It's repeated because it's good and it's right to, speak justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. That is your call. If you're someone that doesn't have a faith or is a part of a faith that doesn't identify a specific deity, you need to look to what your values are that are calling you to love, that calling you to love your neighbor, calling you to be an advocate for justice. And so it's not easy, and there may be significant disappointment, there may be feelings of burnout, and yet that is why it's important to connect with communities, whether it's a community of faith or a community organizing organization, or even right here at BCTC with this event and with people in the community that will help advocate for you or advocate with you, to know that you're not alone. Because if you try to do this on your own, you will burn out. And you need to know that there are other people that are trying to advocate for the good and the right, for your rights as an LGBTQ person, and for the rights of anyone who is marginalized.
Much like Brian, I too have spoken, especially to our leaders in Kentucky and in Washington, about rhetoric that is killing our young people, that is demeaning to the human person, and that is imposing erroneous religious belief upon the constituency that is supposed to be driving their words, their actions, and their decisions. So how do I respond when politicians condemn my sexuality? That's a very good question. I think I want to respond, first of all, with prudence, because vilification never works. They're trying to vilify me. I do not respond by vilifying again. I think dialogue is the path forward. I think honesty in dialogue is the path forward. And I think holding them accountable for what they are supposed to be doing, rather than what they think they should be doing, is imperative. I don't know any politician really that was mandated to preach from a pulpit as part of their civic service. And yet that happens. And it happens in such a way that devaluing people, especially our young, has an impact that is not only toxic, but that, in my opinion, is akin to murder. I know that sounds really strong, but it is. We murder the spirit first. We murder someone's spirit, we kill the spirit. Chances are that we're going to end up killing the person as well. I've seen this in my own work, and I've seen people I've accompanied so many youth that were on the brink of suicide, on the ledge. And you know what drove them there most of the time? Words, something they heard, whether from a church or from a politician or from somewhere that so terrified them that they were afraid to speak to parents, they were afraid to be themselves, they were afraid to go to their minister, they were afraid to go to their priest, to go to the community as who they were, because words convinced them that they were worthless. So how do we respond to politicians that condemn my sexuality? I respond, like Brian said, with righteous indignation and with fierce righteous indignation. We have to be honest, and we have to do that with passion. We also have to send out a counter message, because people are listening and lives are at stake. So if they've got a message that's condemnatory, we've got to get out a larger, louder message, especially so the people in back can hear us, the people in the corners can hear us, the people in the closets can hear us. And our message has to be equal in force and incredibly credible in order to save lives.
Thank you, gentlemen. Those were amazing. We do have a question from our chat. And Chris wonders, is there wording in either of your faith disciplines addressing LGBTQ employees, clergy, members, etc.? For example, there is in the United Methodist Church, which is being questioned.
Yes, there is, and it unequivocally supports LGBTQ persons, non-binary persons, those who identify with gender identities across the spectrum of gender identity. When we recently hired someone, we put very clearly in the listing that we encourage people from historically marginalized identities to apply, so that people know they can apply. And oftentimes, I know LGBTQ persons in many churches feel that they can't apply. And so we make that very clear that if, Black, Indigenous, person of color, or LGBTQ, non-binary, please, you are welcome to apply for this position. That is a denomination-wide standard. No one questions. If I were to go before our ministerial credentialing board again, people would certainly ask me about being gay and how that I've experienced that and how that informs my ministry, but it is not asked as a litmus test, as in, because I am gay, I cannot be a minister, or because I were trans, I couldn't be a minister or non-binary. So that is hardwired into our tradition. We are very clearly an ethical tradition, and we are centered around 8 principles that guide our ethics, that unite us amidst a diversity of beliefs in our congregations. And the very first principle is that we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all people, period, right? And so that is hardwired into our tradition. Where that gets difficult is when we want to affirm worth and dignity of someone we don't particularly like, but that's another question altogether. But for our practices, it is right in the foundation.
Sure. Catholic social teaching has its foundation in the dignity of the human person. The Gospels have obviously their foundation in the dignity of the redeemed human person. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says, as I told you before, that respect, compassion, and sensitivity are necessary for Catholics And that is how, with those things, they are to treat LGBTQ plus persons. It also says that every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided or must be avoided, should be avoided, must be avoided. So with that, I just don't see how in various dioceses around this country that leadership figures that they can just fire LGBTQ plus persons, which we see going on and is always a scandal in my opinion, because that's unjust discrimination that the Catechism tells us that we should not be doing, and that is less than respect, compassion, and sensitivity when we put people out on the streets that don't have health care any longer, that we are fighting for most everyone else, that do not have their dignity any longer, nor the respect of community any longer, and certainly it's a lack of compassion. How do they pay their bills? How do they keep their families, if they have families, fed with a roof over their head? So no, we don't see a unified policy across the Catholic Church. We see pockets. For example, I was in an archdiocese last month in the Northeast, and a high school made it very clear that they will support their gay, LGBTQ, their gay and lesbian teachers who are civilly married, and they will go to bat for them should anybody try to get them to fire their employees, their faculty. We don't see that everywhere, but we're seeing signs of change. If we interpret the Gospels and if we interpret that catechism that I just cited properly, we really don't need all those policies in place because they're already in place. It's just the pastoral application of them, which we see far too often is not pastoral, and which is unjust discrimination in regards to LGBTQ plus persons, and certainly lacks compassion, sensitivity, and respect. So we work for the day, and we have these kind of policies in place by virtue of what's already in place, and then take the gospel on top of it, and there should be no questions about needing additional policies. But sadly, the bias, the judgment, the presumption, the witch hunts go on, and lives are impacted adversely.
Thank you. And our Chris said, thank you. It is a difficult time for some. Your words are encouraging. I wanted to ask, we did send you these questions beforehand. Were there any of them that we sent that you would particularly like to address instead of me just going down the list? But I also want to make sure people can still continue to add questions to the chat, and I'll be sure to ask them.
I'm happy to answer any of those questions. So they're all solid, great questions. So yeah, please, for me at least.
Yeah, I'm happy to. You know, one of the questions that really stuck out with me, and I do want to make sure that I address it because it's part of my ministry, both locally and nationally, is the 7th question that you had there. And it said, my family is so conservative and very religious. I don't know if I can ever tell them I'm gay. Should I wait till I'm older or go ahead and tell them now? Yeah. My advice would be you tell them the minute you think that you are ready to share that information about yourself. I don't think you should wait, nor do I think you should do it before you're ready. Now, I deal with this situation all over the country and beyond. I mean, right now in Poland and Africa, I mean, we've got people that, and elsewhere, we've got people that are beaten up, that are murdered, that are killed, that have just dire consequences for saying who they are, for identifying as, or let alone acting out sexually as members of the gay lesbian community. But getting back to the question, should I wait till I'm older or go ahead and tell them now because my family is so conservative and very religious? I say to you, call me, call Brian, call someone, have someone accompany you, have someone be your support, surround yourself with a community of people that might have done it before or that can help others to do this. And sometimes I think our fear, your fear, might be greater than the reality. I'll cite one example. I had a college student at UK that called me up at 10 o'clock one evening and kept calling me up. And I usually don't answer my phone at that hour. I thought it was my mom, to be honest with you. And I thought, what does she want? She must either have some good scoop or something's wrong. So I answered. And I found out it was a college student that was on the verge of suicide and asked me if I could come to his room and help him because he was just so ready to take his own life. Well, I obviously couldn't do that. I couldn't go to a dorm and do that. And no one was living in our rectory at that time. And I certainly wasn't going to invite a gay young male into a Catholic church's rectory because we've all seen what happens with those kind of things. So I suggested we go to Waffle House, and we sat there till 2 o'clock in the morning. He was so afraid of his conservative parents that he was willing to end his life rather than face that situation because he feared that, I don't want to get into the whole situation, but he feared they were going to find out really soon. And that was going to be the end of him. He wouldn't be able to go to school. He wouldn't be able to have his family any longer. It was going to be horrible because of the religious conservatism of his parents. I talked him off the ledge. I accompanied him. He said, well, will you go with me to Northern Kentucky the next day to tell my parents? I said, sure. Got in the car and went up there. His parents were conservative Christians, but they were mortified that their son was so scared and nearly took his life because of the perception of their faith tradition. They accepted their son perfectly well, and it wasn't an act. I can tell when there's an act. I've done this enough times. They meant it, and they were mortified that they almost lost their son because of the tradition that appeared conservative, and that made him think the parents were the same way. So I urge you too, that if you're listening and you think your parents are conservative and you don't know if you should come out or not come out, don't let what a religious denomination or a faith tradition says necessarily cause you to believe that your parents embrace every last word of that. Because I find out that that's not any more than we all embrace every last word of everything. If we just bought it all lock, stock, and barrel, we wouldn't be thinking people. We'd be like robots. So I don't believe everybody just buys it all. So don't convince yourself of that, number one. And number two, do it when you're ready. And number three, find support. And how to get in touch with one of us or someone else. But don't live in fear, and don't presume, and don't necessarily do it alone unless you want to do it alone, and do it when the time is right.
Hi, Lacey, you had a question. Please unmute.
Hello. Sorry, my chat isn't working. I had a question. My parents are leaders in ministry. They're actually pastors, and my 25-year-old little brother recently just came out as gay. They subsequently told him they loved him, but kind of disowned him. I mean, honestly, this has made him feel very lost. I no longer speak to them. It's fractured how I feel about my faith. And so my question is, how would you suggest I support him? I'm older, I'm 35. I have my own children who it killed me for them to see their grandparents react like that. But how could I support him and help him not to lose his faith? Because I believe there is still something beautiful about it, and I want him to not forget that, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you for supporting your brother. First of all, that's the first step, and being there and letting him know that you're there. That's the first step. You know, my own story is that I lost most of my family when I came out. I really just have my mother in my life right now. And I wouldn't have made it through that if there weren't people that were there to support me and to let me know that I was supported during that. So even though I had this tradition that was, you know, we were the only Unitarians in the family. The rest were Southside Chicago Catholics that were very conservative. And I haven't spoken to them in a very long time. And maybe one day there'll be reconciliation. Maybe there won't be. I don't know. But knowing that there were people there, knowing that I was not alone, and knowing that there were people that would also help expand the circle of a chosen family, we often say, right? Of friends and allies that would continue to be there and support me. That is so crucial. And it's not something where you just go boom overnight, right? But you can certainly assist him if he wants that, right? And just be present and let him know that whatever it is, you're there. Sometimes it might be a while before he exactly knows what he needs, but just that continual reminder can mean the world to someone. As far as not losing the faith, right? You know, there are an increasing number of resources about both decolonizing Christianity and other faiths, and also queer representation. And so there are queer editions of the Bible and queer commentaries on the Bible. There are commentaries on the Pauline epistles, which are often the verses that are used to clobber people that are LGBTQ. But there's also queering Paul's epistles and looking at them through a different lens. There are people who it isn't specifically about LGBTQ issues, but they look at these things and they question how they've been interpreted from the beginning. There are also plenty of affirming communities within Christian traditions. JR represents one of them, right? Of a growing affirming movement and community within Catholicism, and as well as in several other traditions. There are Christian communities that will wholeheartedly support your brother, that will support you as you support him, and welcome him with the abundance of God's love and with the fullness of the good news, right? And I happen to believe there's good news in most religious traditions, and it helps to find people out there. And if you don't have to read books, you can find plenty of other ways to engage this. It's also helpful to know that those people are out there, right? The late author Rachel Held Evans said something that is just so crucial especially for people that have had the Bible used against them, right? And that's a lot of people, right? That's people of color, that's women, that's LGBTQ people. And what she said is, if you go to the Bible looking for love, you're going to find the tools for love. If you go looking for the tools to oppress, you're going to find the tools to oppress. And so it's about perspective, and it's about knowing who's out there, who's advocating for these things. So again, first step is letting him know you're there. And then if he needs help and can identify how he needs help in growing that community of support, that's the next step.
I think that I'd like to just support what Brian said. I don't know if I have too much more to add to that, except about losing the faith. If we look, I'm assuming it's a Christian tradition. If we look at the God revealed to us by Jesus, it's pretty simple. We have a God who is parent, who loves unconditionally and forgives whenever we ask. That's pretty beautiful. That's a faith you want to cling to. I think it's a faith that we all want to cling to. The faith I cling to when it gets rough. That there is a God with whom we walk, and who will be with us and is with us, Emmanuel, God with us, in every step of our journeys. And I know this sounds pious. It sounds really pious, but you got to cling to something. And I think we should cling to the facts. And the fact simply is that Jesus revealed to us who God was, and that is love. God is love. Sounds pretty simple. So love your brother, love your family as best as you can, despite the ugliness, despite the pain, because love is going to win in the end. And just be careful not to vilify. That's what I say. Vilifying only hurts everyone. Look what it's done to your brother. So don't do it. We can't do what others have done to us. And love the best you can. And remember that our faith is based in a God that loves us, that loves your brother. that loves family members that throw their children out too. Calls them to redemption, calls them to a better, higher standard, calls them to a better love, obviously. But love is going to win in the end. And I know that sounds just so Hallmark, doesn't it? But it's the truth.
Thank you both. We have a couple of comments and a question over in chat. Mary wanted us to say and remind college students that there's something called a financial aid dependency waiver. So if you are coming out and one of the threats from a family might be withholding financial backing for continued college, that waiver is out there, and for people to know about that and be able to look into it. Sylvia asked, and she said, this is particularly for JR. Jesus hung out with the marginalized in his time, like the poor, tax collectors, who were despised by both Jews and Romans. If Jesus was in living body today, she believes that he would also be spending time and sharing his love with the LGBTQ community. How does your faith explain inclusivity when people say that the Bible says that homosexuality and sexual immorality are sins and that God created only male and female, so there's no room for other genders?
Ryan, do you want to go first? I'm always second in line here, and that's okay. I'm just trying to go back and forth with you so I don't feel like a hog.
Oh, it's cool. This one I think is for you to start if you like. Yeah, this is specifically for you. Yeah, if you like. I'm happy to go. You could go. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just pretty simple in my opinion. I don't want to make this long and drawn out. If we believe in a God that is infinite, that has infinite possibilities, we believe that this God is revealed to us and is continually revealed to us, that God is continually revealing self to us, then we've got to look at all kinds of things, the things that we learn about science, the things that we learn about psychology, the things we learn about the human person, the things we learn about nature, the things we learn about the cosmos. I mean, look how long the church said that, Galileo was wrong. It took 1,000 years to pardon Galileo. So sometimes our church is not, quick to the draw here. That's for certain. However, the human person is very complex. The human person is the image of God, obviously, we believe, formed in the image and the likeness of God. So who are we to put limits on who God is? God, this infinite love, God, this infinite being that creates and sustains and continually reveals divine self to us through one another. So I think we have to look, again at Scripture in context. We have to look at what our faith traditions tell us about God, what Jesus revealed to us about God, who God is. And if we believe in incarnational theology, well, then we've got to see God revealing self and being born in every last person. We've got to figure out, how does this happen? How is God revealing self to us? How is the complexity of the human person revealing God to me? We don't condemn it. We celebrate it. We celebrate it as a manifestation of God's life in another human person. So I think, just to distill it a little bit more, we've got to believe what others tell us about themselves, about their person. And then we got to figure out, do we believe that God is reflected in that person? And I think it comes to a yes or no answer. And if it's no, we got big problems. And I wonder if we can call ourselves people of faith.
That's excellent. And just to add a couple things. So even though I'm a Unitarian Universalist, I adore the Bible. I adore many forms of Scripture. And when people begin with the Bible says, and you feel like a deer in headlights, if you do at all, it's important to immerse yourself in the Bible. Immerse yourself in the narratives that are there and what it is revealing to you about who God is, and also your experience of the divine in your life. And the more you immerse yourself, the more you will start to realize that you can say, well, I could probably find a reason to justify every war that's ever existed and that's ever happened in this book right now, but I'd also find justification for peace and for love. And so you can find justification for, if you want to look in here, you can queer the Bible, right? God's gender changes in the Hebrew in Genesis several times, right? Also, in the very same book of Romans that people often use to clobber gay and lesbian people or transgender people, in chapter 8 at the end, Paul says declaratively, there is nothing in all of creation that can separate us from the love of God, period. Nothing, period. And so you could get into battles of the Bible all day with people, right? But what's important is to immerse yourself in the things that are going to reveal a loving God to you, because it's there, right? It is right there. And to become familiar with that, and to, the phrase is inwardly digest it, right? Let it become a part of your marrow. And if you're part of a tradition, if you're a Muslim, right, do the same with the Quran, because it's there, right? There is love on those pages. If you're a Mormon, there is love in the pages of the Book of Mormon, and so on and so forth. And so that's all I have to add.
Thank you. At this time, I want to give the 5-minute warning. But right now, we have Jason wanting to ask a question or talk.
Absolutely, thank you. JR, specifically, I'm a gay Catholic in, obviously the Diocese of Lexington, and it reaches out to far eastern Kentucky and around. Is the diocese doing to have other opportunities for the LGBTI community, other than just St. Paul? I don't live in Lexington, so I just live to the north. Is St. Paul's only? What else? I mean, it sounds like the bishop is very supportive. What else? I guess basically, what else is going on in the diocese for St.
Paul? Sure. You were cutting in and out, so I'm going to have. Could anybody else hear the entire question that Jason asked? I imagine it has to do with what else is happening in the diocese for LGBTQ persons besides at St. Paul's. Is that the essence of it? I couldn't quite hear.
Yes, actually, sorry about that.
Okay, sure. So St. Paul's is the flagship and the model of ministry in the 5-year plan of the diocese, the 5-year strategic plan for LGBTQ ministry. Right now, St. Paul's is probably one of the only places that has intentional outreach and very vocal and very prophetic outreach to the LGBT community. It's going to end up being probably the home, it already is, of LGBTQ plus Catholics in the diocese. One of the things that I've been tasked with, and we've been tasked with in the newly established commission, the LGBT Commission, which is now part of the structure of the Diocese of Lexington under the umbrella of peace and justice, which is huge. It's a huge thing. It's not just St. Paul's ministry any longer. Now my ministry represents the Bishop of Lexington throughout the 50 counties of the diocese. One of the things that we're tasked with is exportable ministerial prototype that other parishes can follow to reach out to LGBT community persons. That becomes a huge issue in places in Eastern Kentucky, where if you're just from the wrong county, you've got a problem, let alone if you want to identify as an LGBTQ plus person and do that publicly. So right now, throughout the diocese, there is no uniformity. There probably never will be, even though we're Catholic and we're universal. We're as different as the colors of the rainbow, pun intended. But I think one of the things that we're going to do now, and I encourage you to do this, Jason, you can go to my Facebook page or the diocesan website or the diocesan Instagram or the diocesan Facebook, and you will see that we're having a listening session as part of the synod next week, Thursday, at St. Paul, listening session just for LGBTQ plus persons and their families and friends. And that report then goes to the diocese, then goes on to Rome. We're doing that through Zoom, I think, on that following Saturday. Find out that information or get in touch with me and I'll send it to you. Then we can take all of that and we can move into the diocese by having heard LGBTQ plus persons in the diocese. I am leery to ever think I know what somebody needs. But what I've learned, the needs of Eastern Kentucky are very different than the LGBTQ plus community here in Lexington or in the Bluegrass. I've learned that they're very different all over the place. So I listen a lot and I take my cues from what people need. But yeah, you know, this is a diocesan ministry now, and it's going to go out. We need the cooperation of pastors, though. So I encourage you to encourage your pastor to cooperate with the Lgbt Commission when we put out word, when we invite people and so forth. And if push comes to shove and your parish isn't where it needs to be at this point, come over to St. Paul, become part of the ministry, and then take that ministry, the exportable programs that we have, and do it with our team to bring it to your parish. I hope that answered you a little bit. If it didn't, contact me and we can talk more privately.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
All right, everyone. I am very sorry, but we are out of time. I thank everyone for their participation and their questions and our fabulous speakers. I know they educated me and taught me new things, so I hope that they've spoken to you all as well. Gentlemen, any last things you want to say as we sign off?
I just want to say thanks to my good friend and colleague, Reverend Chenowith. I learned a lot from you today. Thank you. I always learn a lot from you. And thank you to all the people that asked questions, and thanks for hosting this forum. Everyone, thank you.
Thanks to everyone for being here, and thanks to you again. Also, JR, my husband is a gay Catholic, so it really helps for him to know of your work here in Lexington. So it is great to connect with BCTC again and everyone else here. So thank you and blessings to all of you.
Thank you, everyone.